In this episode, a collector's dream comes true as he unboxes this. One of the most coveted Elton Grails of all time, the limited 1975 brown vinyl Captain Fantastic, hand-signed as issued by both Elton John and Bernie Taupin inside the gatefold, one of just 2,000 copies pressed exactly 50 years ago. Of those original 2,000 brown vinyl copies, how many survive today? How many survive in shape this good? And how many of those copies once belonged to John Lennon? Well, this one might have. Stay tuned for Collecting Elton. So this episode is part 2, a continuation of the Grail-mania series, which began last week with the Blood Record Chateau. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, please follow the link in the video description. A fellow collector and friend, Alfonso, sent me a package originally intended for Christmas, but, well, if you haven't seen part 1 yet, do watch it for the full backstory. For those of you not as familiar with this specific edition of Captain Fantastic and the Brown Dirt Cowboy, and by the way, that's fine. I've been collecting Elton stuff for almost 35 years now, but I read about this edition of Captain Fantastic for the first time only about 5 years ago. So, for those of you not yet familiar with the Brown Vinyl Fantastic, here's the basic story. When Captain Fantastic was released in 1975, Elton's record company in America, MCA, pressed 2,000 copies of the new album in medium dark brown vinyl. But MCA didn't ship any of these brown vinyl copies for standard retail. These were promotional copies. According to Rockhurst Auctions, which once listed a copy for sale, the brown vinyl Fantastics were produced to be sent to industry executives, distributors, and retailers to be used for promotional giveaways or the like, or most likely just to be kept. And I wouldn't be surprised, of course, if members of Elton's team also received copies. But the brown vinyl wasn't this edition's only unique feature. Using blue ballpoint pen, Elton and Bernie each autographed their photos inside the album's gatefold. The first time a special edition of any Elton album included both his and Bernie's handwritten signatures. The brown vinyl Fantastic was also Elton's first authorized colored vinyl release in North America, one of his earliest colored vinyl releases anywhere, and is much desired today not just for the brown vinyl, but also for the rarity of having both Elton and Bernie's signatures on the inner sleeve. Now, before I say anything more about this copy, let's go back to the unboxing reel and relish the moment when I first laid eyes on this beauty. So this is about where we left off last week, and as I said, Alfonso had intended this originally as a Christmas gift and had posted it way back in November, hence the wrapping paper. I'm smiling here because it's long after Christmas and Boxing Day. Now this gave me pause. Alfonso is a Monty Python fan, so he usually puts something related to Monty Python and the Holy Grail, the movie, when he sends something that's a grail. And this is even better because I'm not much of a Monty Python fan, but I do remember classic Nintendo games fondly, and this is Super Mario in what looks like one of the costumes from that movie. And on the other side of the box is a cartoon of the 4 leads from the Holy Grail movie, Crossing Abbey Road. And Alfonso's left me a little instruction here. Cut carefully with new knife. New knife. And here we go. Now you're about to see the moment I revealed last week, but this time from another angle. And that's when I saw the orange sticker and I knew exactly what was in that box. Holy. Holy. My eloquence has always been one of my best qualities. Oh, whoa. It's an unsealed copy, of course, but that's the original orange sticker that would have been on the shrink wrap in 1975. So I turned it over and I see this letter encapsulated in the clear outer sleeve. And I'm just reading bits of the letter here. I'm not really sure what it is or what it means at first. Then I really began to read it. And what it was a Provenance Letter, composed and signed by the owner from whom Alfonso bought this copy over 20 years ago. And the letter claims that this former owner had purchased the copy, sometime in the 80s or 90s it would have had to have been, from a record store in Los Angeles on La Cienega Boulevard, a store where John Lennon had shopped regularly back in the 70s. The letter claims that Lennon had been such a loyal customer that the shop's owner would let him come after hours because he'd buy so much in just one visit. Now, the store in question, which the letter doesn't name, also sold bootlegs, which Lennon liked to collect. Anyway, the point of the letter's story is that sometime after Lennon's death in 1980, Yoko allegedly turned up at the store with some boxes of John's records left in a quote-unquote winter apartment that John and Yoko had kept in the years before his death, a winter apartment located just a few blocks away from the record store on La Cienega. Among the treasures in those boxes was a signed Frank Sinatra record, and this signed brown vinyl Captain Fantastic, which, Yoko told the store owner, had been a gift to Lennon from Lennon's dear friend, Elton John. Hence, this record was just one of the great pieces I was fortunate enough to purchase. It was given to John by his friend Elton John at the party for the closing of the Rocket Record Company. Holy. The letter claimed that Yoko had offered several boxes of Lennon's records to the store, as she, quote, didn't know what to do with them. The owner kept the signed Sinatra and the brown vinyl Fantastic for himself until he closed his store years later and sold the Lennon copy of Captain Fantastic to the collector who eventually sold it to Alfonso. And it was that collector who documented the copy's provenance in this letter before that copy made it into Alfonso's collection. I want to look at the LP itself here, but I can't figure out how to access the record. Alfonso's placed this copy in one of those clear outer sleeves that encapsulate gatefold albums, but I haven't realized that yet. Oh. Now, at that point, I'd actually forgotten about the signatures. And to be funny, and to kind of lead me off the scent, I guess, in an email sent when the package was still in transit, Alfonso warned me that the second record in the box had writing on the sleeve, but don't worry, it wasn't on the cover. So here I see those signatures and remember. And it's actually not the Provenance Letter that's kind of doing it for me here. The full weight of what I had really began to sink in when I saw Elton and Bernie's autographs. So I finally figured out how the clear outer sleeve works here, and I want to see the brown vinyl LP. I get a better look now at that orange sticker. Nice. This limited edition pressing is one of 2,000 personally autographed to thank you for your support. There it is, finally. Brown vinyl LP, which may not appear that brown here on camera, but has a luster almost like that of chocolate pudding or some kind of fudge. It's much, much more conspicuously brown than it appears in this footage anyway. I'm looking at the runouts here. It is the Brian Ingoldsby cut. It's an Ingoldsby cut. That's good. And pressed at Gloversville, if I recall. Gloversville pressing. I'm laughing, of course, because holy. If you get a copy of this, it ain't one you're going to play right, so, who cares where it was pressed or who cut the lacquers. Alfonso attached a little post-it note to the letter. A claimed association copy with inadequate provenance. Whomever the previous owner was, they did not take great care of the vinyl. However, you don't seek this MCA issue for the sound quality. Fair enough. We'll discuss what Alfonso means by inadequate provenance shortly. I'm speechless. I sat there for a few minutes just taking it all in. Remember, only minutes before, I'd also received that Blood Record Chateau. So that was 2 Grails in one box, boom, boom, you know. And one of them, possibly the grailiest Elton Grail of all time. Thank you. Thank you. Holy thank you. Wow. Yes, once again, Alfonso, I can't thank you enough for this and for the Blood Record Chateau. Your generosity is much, much appreciated. Now let's talk a bit more about the brown vinyl Fantastic. Catalogs claim that all 2,000 copies were signed. The orange sticker from 1975 more or less validates that. But unsigned copies exist, apparently. Those copies may have been re-sleeved aftermarket. That wouldn't be difficult to do, especially if an owner wanted to keep the autograph sleeve but didn't mind parting with the LP itself. And about stickers and sleeves, I have a few unanswered questions. For example, if MCA didn't intend these brown vinyl copies for traditional retail but for promotion, I'm a little confused as to why MCA bothered to shrink wrap them. Even in the United States, manufacturers rarely if ever ship promotional copies in shrink. Perhaps MCA could foresee, even 50 years ago, that this edition would one day be a collectible, and that a factory seal might matter to future collectors? Maybe, but probably not. I do wonder sometimes if MCA had originally intended these brown vinyl copies for traditional retail, but for some reason changed that plan, turned them into promotional copies. I don't know. If anything, it may well have been just because, like their black vinyl counterparts, these brown copies included the booklets and the poster, and shrink wrap would have helped contain those extras during shipping and distribution. Now let's have a closer look at this signed Provenance letter and most specifically the custodial history it describes. Now I have to admit, after reading the letter, for a couple weeks after, I felt certain that the letter's story was more likely true than untrue. I even said that at the end of last week's video. And in some ways, the story's more circumstantial aspects seem to check out, at least at first. For starters, Elton John and John Lennon were friends in the mid-70s. That was no secret. John and Yoko had lived in Los Angeles in the 70s too. In fact, connections existed between Lennon and multiple addresses in the greater Los Angeles area. Lennon was an avid record collector with a special interest in bootlegs, and the letter claims that Lennon liked how the store sold bootlegs. So to me, that gave the letter a sort of truthiness about it. Although the letter never names the store, La Cienega Boulevard is one of Los Angeles' longest downtown streets, lined with many businesses, and back in the 70s, record stores wouldn't have been at all out of place downtown Los Angeles. And as for the Rocket Records label, by 1973, indeed, it had established itself in the United States with an office in Beverly Hills, the exact same address on South Beverly Drive as the American offices of John Reed Enterprises. But as the letter suggests, Rocket Records didn't last long in North America. It closed its U.S. operations after just a few years. And I'd find it hard to believe that in those days, even the closing of a record label didn't merit some kind of party, especially in L.A. So, although the Provenance letter really doesn't prove anything, it merely repeats a story told by a storekeeper many, many years before, when that storekeeper sold the LP to the former owner who wrote this letter. Still, I thought that based on all the facts I just went over, the story was more likely true than untrue. I also figured that with some further documentary research, it wouldn't be that difficult to prove or corroborate at least a few of the story's claims. So I put my researcher hat on and began to dig. But as so often happens in research, my work accomplished the opposite. The only proof I could find cast great doubt on the story's authenticity, at least the story as the letter tells it. Let's begin with the claim that John and Yoko had a winter apartment, quote-unquote, downtown Los Angeles. Yes, as I said before, John and Yoko had lived several places in Los Angeles, but as it turns out, they never lived there for long, and all that happened before 1973, the year they bought their first unit at the Dakota in New York City. And neither John nor Yoko actually owned property in Los Angeles in the 1970s, not even John during his Lost Weekend period. So right away, this claim that Yoko found John's abandoned records in a winter apartment they kept for years in LA doesn't really add up. I searched biographies and interview transcripts and other sources for any mention of such a property, and the only example I could find of a John and Yoko residence outside of Manhattan was a cattle farm they owned and occasionally visited in upstate New York. Another point is the timing. If Elton gave Lennon a copy of Captain Fantastic, he couldn't have done that any earlier than spring 1975, which was when the first copies of Captain Fantastic were pressed. If he gave Lennon the copy after the album's release, it's unlikely he would have after the fall of 1975 because Sean Lennon was born that October. And shortly after Sean's birth, John and Yoko finally settled their immigration status in the US and began a life of domestic seclusion with little Sean at the Dakota in New York, eschewing the party scene entirely and seeing very few, if any, showbiz friends. Elton and Lennon certainly didn't stop being friends after their Thanksgiving gig at the Garden, and they did meet occasionally in Lennon's last years. But after John's lost weekend period ended, they didn't see each other as much, especially after Sean's birth. So much had changed in just 1 year. Things would soon change for Elton too, who in late 1976 would begin a life of semi-retirement in Old Windsor, England, visiting the US to perform or to promote his releases, which were much less frequent in the late 70s. My point is this. As unlikely as it would have been then for Lennon to fly to LA to attend a record label party, it's unlikely that either one would have made the trip after 1976. And what about that claim that this gift exchange had occurred at a party for the closing of Rocket Records? Well, Rocket Records was Elton's baby, the label he helped establish worldwide in 1973 and whose US offices were in Los Angeles. And although the Rocket Record Company would survive in many countries around the world well into the 90s, it did shut down its US operations after only a few years. But here's what I found. Although I'd always assumed that it left the US in the late 70s sometime, turns out it closed and left sometime in the early 1980s. Looks like it would have been about maybe 81, 82. So if someone had staged a farewell party for Rocket, John Lennon could not have been there. Now, it's always possible that that part of the letter's story is an honest error, one of human memory, and that the party in question had been something else. But even then, ask yourself this simple but important question. Why would Yoko Ono turn up years later in Los Angeles, where she and John did not maintain a winter apartment, not that I could find anyway, just to give a few boxes of her late husband's records for free to a used record store? I know that Yoko's ways could sometimes seem strange to outsiders, but this story just has too many holes in it. It's all circumstantial, and if the copy's provenance was so important to the shopkeeper, why leave it to a customer to document that story? I don't imagine the shopkeeper parted with his beloved Lennon copy of Captain Fantastic for just a few dollars. So in summary, I think the letter's story is bull. I know Alfonso never 100% believed it either. If you want something fascinating to watch, in fact, some of you very serious collectors might find this difficult to watch, in this video's description, I've included a link to another YouTube video, that one by a guy who bought a mint condition sealed copy of one of these, but decided to open it. Hey, it was his copy, right? And as the late Robert Palmer once observed, some people can do what they like. Thank you once more to Alfonso for these gifts, and as always, thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this video and or learned anything new, please remember to click like. Doing that helps my videos a lot. And if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, please consider it. And of course, a big thank you to all my subscribers and loyal viewers. We're going to have a lot of fun this year, I promise. See you again soon.